Good evening, this is Harvey Ambrose. I'm a guest minister on the Wells of Salvation Radio Ministry, preaching tonight to Grace Baptist Mission in Soldotna, Alaska. We're continuing in our study of the book of Daniel, and we come to chapter 5, and we'll begin reading in verse 1. Belshazzar the king made a great feast to 1,000 of his lords, and drank wine before the 1,000. Belshazzar, whilst he tasted the wine, commanded to bring the golden and silver vessels which his father Nebuchadnezzar had taken out of the temple which was in Jerusalem, that the king and his princes, his wives, and his concubines might drink therein. Then they brought the golden vessels that were taken out of the temple of the house of God, which was at Jerusalem. And the king and his princes, his wives, and his concubines drank in them. They drank wine, and praised the gods of gold and of silver, of brass and of iron, of wood and of stone. In the same hour came forth fingers of a man's hand, and wrote over against the candlestick upon the plaster of the wall of the king's palace. And the king saw the part of the hand that wrote. Then the king's countenance was changed, and his thoughts troubled him, so that the joints of his loins were loosed, and his knees smote one against the other. The king cried aloud to bring the astrologers, the Chaldeans, and the soothsayers. And the king spake and said to the wise men of Babylon, Whosoever shall read this writing, and show me the interpretation thereof, shall be clothed with scarlet, and have a chain of gold about his neck, and shall be the third ruler in the kingdom. Then came in all the king's wise men, but they could not read the writing, nor make known to the king the interpretation thereof. Then was Belshazzar greatly troubled, and his countenance was changed in him, and his lords were astonied. Now the queen, by reason of the words of the king and his lords, came into the banquet house, and the queen spake and said, O king, live forever. Let not thy thoughts trouble thee, nor thy countenance be changed. There is a man in thy kingdom, in whom is the spirit of the holy gods, and in the days of thy father, light and understanding and wisdom of the gods was found in him, whom the king Nebuchadnezzar, thy father, the king, thy father, made master of the magicians, astrologers, Chaldeans, and soothsayers. Forasmuch as an excellent spirit and knowledge and understanding, interpreting of dreams, and showing of hard sentences, and dissolving of doubts, were found in the same Daniel, whom the king named Belteshazzar. Now let Daniel be called, and he will show the interpretation. Then was Daniel brought in before the king, and the king spake and said unto Daniel, Art thou that Daniel, which art of the children of the captivity of Judah, whom the king my father brought out of Jewry? I have even heard of thee, that the spirit of the gods is in thee, and that light and understanding and excellent wisdom is found in thee. And now the wise men, astrologers, have been brought in before me, that they should read the writing, and make known unto me the interpretation thereof. But they could not show the interpretation of the thing. And I have heard of thee, that thou canst make interpretations, and dissolve doubts. Now if thou canst read the writing, and make known to me the interpretation thereof, thou shalt be clothed with scarlet, and have a chain of gold about thy neck, and shalt be the third ruler in the kingdom. I'm going to stop reading there, lest I become more tongue-tied as I progress. Some of that is written strangely, so I got tumbled up over it. But I think you caught the gist, and we all know the story, I would assume, of the handwriting on the wall. It's an interesting thing that we still use that to this very day. I think we know the handwriting on the wall, But it wasn't what was written so much that scared the king. Scare is a pretty weak term to use here. It put him into a seizure, from what I can understand. They talk about it talks about the loins, the knees shaking together and all that kind of stuff. He had a fit. It says that happened when he saw the fingers that were doing the writing. Not so much the writing, but when he saw the fingers that did the writing. Now, people have, over the years, postulated, I think the Jews are still to this day pretty sure that was the angel Gabriel, even though the Bible doesn't say. But I think it's pretty clear that it was the fingers of God. Now we can say, well, God doesn't have fingers, but yet when he was up on Sinai with Moses, he used his fingers to write the 10 Commandments in the 2 tables of stone. He wrote in the rock. Here he's writing on plaster. Plaster is kind of like a rock. It goes on liquid and hardens. We use drywall now for the most part, but it's a similar substance, heavy in limestone. The point of this, I guess to start with, this chapter is a fulfillment of chapter 2, where Nebuchadnezzar saw an image with a gold head and arms and chest of silver, then a belly and thighs of brass, and then legs of iron and feet, part of iron and part of clay. And he was troubled by a dream of that statue, and he did not remember the statue. He had to have someone tell it to him, and of course no one could except God. So God, through Daniel, revealed the dream and the interpretation of it. And the interpretation was that Nebuchadnezzar, and by extension the kingdom of Babylon, in terms of what it represented on the statue, was the head of gold. It was a more noble kingdom than the ones that follow. It was a more rich kingdom, at least per capita, than any of the rest of them, from what I've been able to study. And he says, thou art the head of gold, but it also means the kingdom. And when he starts talking about silver, the arms and chest of silver, he says that's a kingdom that's going to follow you. It's not going to be as great as you are, but it's going to follow you. And, that happens at the end of this chapter. At the end of chapter 5, the kingdom of Babylon is gone forever. Now, between chapter 4 and chapter 5, most people think we have a space of about 30 years of time. So when Nebuchadnezzar was, as it was told him by Daniel, because of his pride, God had given him a year to repent. He didn't tell him how long he gave him. And he didn't repent. He remained prideful. And then, because of that, and there was something that God wanted to do with Nebuchadnezzar, I think he knew that it would work. He humbled him. He made him like an animal. We talked about that last week. And he was like a cow. He was out eating grass and just living wild. But yet his kingdom was kept for him by God, as that was prophesied in the dream that he saw, interpreted by Daniel. Now, 30 years later, maybe 28 years since the death of Nebuchadnezzar, we read of Belshazzar. And he didn't have a dream. And he wasn't given a year to repent, much less an additional 7. He was given no time at all. And I think that's a marked difference that we should all contemplate. Just because the Lord has been known to be long-suffering and gracious, and that is what he is. He's merciful. He's not willing that any should perish, but that all come to repentance. No one is condemned by him without being given ample opportunity and motivation to repent. But some people just don't. And when the gig is up, it's up. So this is handled in a different way. So we have now Nebuchadnezzar, long dead. Belshazzar, he's spoken of as being the son of Nebuchadnezzar, but he's not the son. He says that Nebuchadnezzar was his father. He was really like maybe his 4 times great-grandfather. Now that doesn't mean that there's been that big of a period. About the first 4 people that, maybe the first 3 that rose to the throne after Nebuchadnezzar, they lasted either a year or 2 years each. So they went through several kings really quickly, and then there was a 4th one called Nabonidus, who was the father of Belshazzar. And it was a co-regency for a while. And I'm believing that the co-regency had already ended, and Belshazzar was ruling solely over Babylon, even though something that the co-regency was happening at this time. I don't think so. I think that Belshazzar's behavior at the feast was an indication that even though he, and we will read, that he knew all about the story of Nebuchadnezzar. He knew what God did with Nebuchadnezzar. He no doubt read the proclamation that Nebuchadnezzar wrote, that we read in the last chapter, in which he tells of his salvation experience, writes it down, and sends it to all nations and people and tongues, because he thought it was good that they should hear it. Which it is good, when we get saved, to tell it to whomever will hear it. Whether they will hear or whether they will forbear, it's a story that we should speak of. Let the redeemed of the earth say so. So anyway, you guys pray for me. I'm having trouble. Whereas Nebuchadnezzar repented, Belshazzar, fully aware of that and of the conversion of his great ancestor Nebuchadnezzar, not great because he was that long ago, it was only like 30 years ago that he lived or something like that. He was a greater king. He was better in every regard. It's worth noting that at the time of the account that we're reading here about the fingers writing on the wall, Cyrus the Great had been besieging the city of Babylon for over a year. There was a 2-year siege by Cyrus against Belshazzar and Babylon. In the first year of the siege, Belshazzar took his armies and went out to meet Cyrus in open battle and was thoroughly whipped. It was routed, and he hightailed it back to Babylon to escape death. And once he got into Babylon, he closed the gates and never intended to leave. Babylon was noted for having, first off, the means of food production. Secondly, a river literally flowed underneath the walls of it and out the other end. So they always had water. They always had food. 20 years worth of food were stored up in Babylon. They weren't afraid of a siege. The walls were 300 feet tall, and I think like 85 feet thick, somewhere on that order. It was massive. It had gardens and parks and crops and all that stuff, everything that's needed. So, well, since he couldn't fight, he just waited. He was going to wait out Cyrus. That appears to be his plan. I said that in context of Nebuchadnezzar being a greater king. I don't think Nebuchadnezzar would have done it. In the first place, I don't think Nebuchadnezzar would have lost against Cyrus. He was a man of war, and the Lord had given him skills in the art of war. But even if he thought he would be beaten, he would not cower behind the walls that he had built. That was for this lesser heir to do, this Belshazzar. It was known to Cyrus. It had become known to Cyrus during the siege. This is what, there were historians that wrote about this. There was this riotous feast on an annual basis, whereby the king and all of his lords, his ministers of high rank, cabinet members, whatever you want to call them, 1,000 of them with their wives and he and his concubines and wives would toast. They would drink to the gods that they worshipped. They worshipped all manner of gods. We know that they worshipped the moon and the sun. They worshipped a god named Baal. They had all kinds of gods, so-called. It speaks about them. It speaks about the toast. It says they drank wine and praised the gods of gold. Listen to these metals: gold, silver, brass, and iron. The very things that formed the image that Nebuchadnezzar had dreamed about, and that, speaking of 4 kingdoms. Then it also says, though, besides those things, gods of wood and gods of stone. So who knows what else they did? The thing was, they were getting drunk. Belshazzar had already drank before it entered his mind to get the golden vessels that had been made back when Moses was there, according to a pattern that Moses saw in a vision from God. They were sanctified vessels, sanctified to the service of the one true God. We don't know what all the vessels were, but they were gold and silver. They were in the temple. They are listed when we go, back. I haven't done it, but it lists, all that was in there. Nebuchadnezzar took it all and I guess put it in a storage room, some treasure house. But he never dared to defile them. He never tried to get the Jews to convert. He apparently believed in allowing people to worship what they wanted to. Even when he got saved, we don't read him commanding people to be saved. He knew that you could command it all you want, but that's not going to make them saved. Because we're not saved by a commandment from men or by their direction. If we're saved by God and Him only. It's up to God whether or not you get saved. And it's up to God to communicate that salvation to your heart so that you can know it. Well, having drunk too much, probably, Belshazzar asked for those vessels and filled them with wine. And we don't know what all was going on at this massive party, because that's what it is. When you get 1,000 people together of high political rank, including the king of the empire, there's no telling what's going on. A lot of food, a lot of drinking, a lot of false idol worship, apparently. But it seems as though when you take something that comes out of the very temple built by Solomon, the material prepared by David, according to, and those things that went in the Holy of Holies, actually by Moses, that went in the first tabernacle and then were later installed in the temple. You fill that with wine, and I guess everybody get filled at once, and when they all had their cups filled, they drank wine and praised. It's almost like they made a toast to various false gods using those vessels. Now, this was no surprise to God. God had prophesied 200 years before by Isaiah that Babylon was going to fall, and who was going to take it? It was going to be Cyrus the Great that took it. Okay, and it happened just exactly just exactly like God said. God spoke, and I'll just speak of it rather than going back. You can look for it yourself. It'd be, first off, it's prophesied in Isaiah 13, and then later it's drilled down even more in Isaiah 45. But I'll just read you a little bit of it. It says, verse 1, chapter 45 of Isaiah, 200 years before it happened, the Lord's, thus saith the Lord to his anointed, his, the one that he is anointed to a task. Now Christ is the anointed of God. He was anointed by the Spirit of God to do a task for God. Of course, he was God. But here, Cyrus was anointed, just like the kings of Israel were anointed with oil. To his anointed, Cyrus, who had not been born yet, by the way, when Isaiah prophesied this, whose right hand I have held, to subdue nations before him. And I will loose the loins of kings. Okay. Which is exactly what just happened to Belshazzar, right? He says, it was, his loins were loosed, his knees shook together, he just fell apart. He says to open before him, meaning before Cyrus, the two-leaved gates, and the gates shall not be shut. When you read the history of the conquest, there wasn't much known about it other than what was written by Daniel for hundreds of years. Well, thousands. And then they found two different cuneiform drums. They were in the walls of two different cities. The first was Ur of the Chaldees, and that spoke about Nabonidus, Belshazzar's father, and what he did, and he spoke of the fall, and then also there was another drum found in the walls of the city of Babylon. These both happened in the 1800s AD. So recent history. And it was actually written by Cyrus the Great, and he spoke of conquering that city. Okay. And as he spoke of it, here's how he did it. He diverted the river. He did it so that on the night of this wild party, where nobody would be watching, he'd go underneath the walls, which were like a screen at that point to let the river through. As the water level dropped low enough, they went under it, and they didn't drown because they got the water low enough. He diverted the river, Euphrates, so that the water level dropped as it passed through the town. Now, there was walls on either side of the river that were just as high as the outside walls. So had they been alert and at their guard post, Cyrus never could have taken the city, even though he had gotten through. But somehow, he knew to do it. I'd say the Lord put it on his heart. Somehow, when he got there, he knew there were gates there. He was hoping during this night of drunkenness, the whole town, that somebody would leave the gate open. And that's what God says in Isaiah. He says, I'll go back and read it again. I will loose the loins of king to open before Cyrus the two-leaved gates, and the gates shall not be shut. I will go before thee and make the crooked places straight. I will break in pieces the gates of brass. By the way, every gate in that city was brass and thick brass, and cut in sunder the bars of iron. So I guess in some of the gates they'd have like a speakeasy where you could look through it, and that would have bars in it. He's specifically talking about making it where Cyrus could take the city, and he did. It all happened on a night when Belshazzar was having a party because he trusted in the walls and he had no thought towards God. It speaks of his countenance having changed, and I'm going to try to find a quick passage in Psalm. I'm doing so bad anyway, we'll just go on a Bible study rather than a sermon. Psalm chapter 10 seems to speak of this. So Psalm 10 verse 4 says, the wicked, through the pride of his countenance, will not seek God. God is not in all his thoughts. Another translation of that says, he does not believe in God. It doesn't occur to him that he doesn't believe there is a God. The wicked. He had no fear of him, and that brought about foolishness on his part. And that brought about the fall of his whole kingdom, which God had said would happen, and it happened just like it did. It's an interesting study if you go looking it up and what has been written about it. But it's an amazing thing that the most powerful city in the world, perhaps to this very day, in terms of what it had in opposition. I mean, they didn't have helicopters back then, so they couldn't get after it. They didn't have airplanes to drop bombs. Given what any opponent trying to take the city would have, Rome itself had nowhere near the fortifications of this city, nor did it have the same water sources that were undisturbable and all the places where crops could be grown in 20 years. Rome was lucky to buy bread for bit by bit. Once they started giving it away, they were really subject to the whims of the Egyptian rulers as to whether or not they got bread at all. Certainly had nothing like 20 years worth of food saved up. The greatest city of man, most likely, that's ever existed was Babylon. And God let it rise up. He lets men do what they want to do. And if what they want to do is in defiance of God, he lets them do it. To a point. He is long-suffering. But when the point comes, down they go. And it's happened in kingdom after kingdom, in empire after empire. If we last long enough, it'll happen to our nation too. There's been no exceptions to it. So anyway, I need to get on with this. I'm doing a terrible job here. So, he sees it. He's terrified when he sees the fingers that were writing. It says, now the queen. Now this was not his wife. This was the queen mother. This would have been his mother, who was wife of Nabonidus, the former king, and the king with which Belshazzar co-ruled for a couple of years. So the queen mother, by reason of the words, came to him and tells him to quieten down, don't be worried, I know a man, And it puts you in mind kind of the woman at the well. After she got saved, she goes in to the city and says, come see a man that told me everything I ever did. She's saying, here's someone that can tell you all you need to know, because the Spirit of God is in him, and he's been given the ability to know all these mysteries and secrets. He'll make it known to you. Daniel had apparently been forgotten. By this time, and guys, you can appreciate this, he was in his 80s. Okay, so he was getting long in the tooth. I don't think he was being used by this king, because he didn't call for Daniel. He probably didn't know it. He may have had some recollection of him, maybe reading the declaration of Nebuchadnezzar, which mentioned Daniel. Then maybe he had heard of him, but he didn't consider asking him until his mother told him to. She should have started talking to that boy a lot earlier than she did. Anyway, so Belshazzar tells Daniel the same thing. He kind of gives him some flowery speech, like flattering, like what his mother had told him. And he offers him the same thing. I'll give you this rich robe, a big chain of gold to go around your neck, and I'll make you third ruler. I guess that would be behind him and his father, if he was still living, or him and his wife, if he was married. Anyway, third ruler in the kingdom. He said, but you're going to have to tell me what this means. He said, these other guys can't do it. Now, I think that's interesting because the words that will come up, they are in Chaldean. This was Chaldea. This was, I mean, this man, Belshazzar, was a Chaldean. Why is it they couldn't read it? I mean, how do we understand that? So it's written in Chaldean, even though at this point Daniel is still writing in Aramaic, which Chaldean is a kind of a partially like that. But he writes the exact words in verse 25. And we'll just read a little bit and get to this. So we'll just pick up at 17 where we left off. Daniel's response to Nebuchadnezzar. To Belshazzar. Daniel answered and said before the king, let thy gifts be to thyself. Give thy rewards to another. He said, I don't want the robe. I don't need the chain. I don't need anything that you've got for me. He was old enough now where I'm sure he had contempt for this man who had just got through doing what he did with the vessels of gold and all that. He said, and give that reward to somebody else. He said, yet I will read the writing unto the king and make known to him the interpretation. But he doesn't do it right away. He's going to give this boy a piece of his mind, or maybe a piece of the mind of God. Maybe it's God speaking through Daniel. He says, O thou king, the Most High God gave Nebuchadnezzar thy father a kingdom, and majesty, and glory, and honor. And for the majesty that he gave him, all people, nations, languages, trembled and feared before him. See, he was a much greater king. Whom he would, he slew. Whom he would, he kept alive. And whom he would, he set up. And whom he would, he put down. He was an absolute ruler, a monarch, a tyrant, if you will. But when his heart was lifted up, and his mind hardened in pride, which saved or lost, we need to flee from pride with every ounce of strength that we have, because it is the one thing mentioned in the Bible where it said God resists pride in men. If you're a proud person, God actively works against you while you're living. That's an important thing to think about. So he says, but when his heart was lifted up and his mind hardened in pride, he was disposed from his kingly throne, and they took his glory from him. This is when he lost his mind. He was driven from the sons of men, and his heart was made like beasts, and his dwelling was with the wild asses, and they fed him with the grass like oxen. And his body was wet with the dew of heaven, till he knew that the Most High God ruled in the kingdom of men, and that he appointed over it whomsoever he will. God let Nebuchadnezzar know who he was, and that he was in charge, and that everything Nebuchadnezzar had ever done, he owed it to God. Everything he had, he owed it to God. That's my words. Verse 22, and thou, his son, O Belshazzar, hast not humbled thine heart, though thou knewest all this. Now see, in one place in the Bible, he says, I think it was on the Sermon on Mars Hill, he says, in the times of this ignorance, God winked at, but now commandeth all men everywhere to repent. God has more mercy in store for those who are ignorant and fail to do what they're supposed to than he has for those who, in full possession of the facts, full knowledge of the truth, choose wickedness over righteousness, choose ungodliness over godliness, choose to live a life. It's theirs. God's given it to them. God has upheld it, and yet they choose the evil over the good. There's harsh judgment for people that do that. hell after you die, a lake of fire after your body's raised, and a resurrection of damnation on the last day. Perpetual punishment. Verse 23, after he says, you've known all this, and you did not humble your heart. So he's had a chance. He's had the opportunity to repent, and he wouldn't do it. Verse 23, but thou hast lifted up thyself against the Lord of heaven. In other words, you've made yourself to be an enemy of his. And that's what I think he deliberately toasted in those glasses of those vessels that came from the temple. And it was right in, it's like he was casting his pride and arrogance and unbelief right there into the teeth of God. And they have brought the vessels of his house before thee, and thou and thy lords, thy wives and thy concubines have drunk wine in them, and thou hast praised the gods of silver and gold and brass and iron, wood and stone, which see not, nor hear, nor know, and the God in whose hand thy breath is, and whose are all thy ways, hast thou not glorified. So here you are drinking oblations and worshiping dumb idols that can't see, that can't hear, can't do a thing. They're just metal or rock or wood. They're nothing. And yet, you don't humble yourself above the one who is keeping you alive at this moment. Your breath is in his hand. I never think, I said that wrong. I often think about where in the Bible it tells us that our very breath is in his hands. We have to have air to live. If we stop breathing, we die. God can turn us off like we could flip a light switch, folks. It's just that easy. And he's got no obligation to keep us living, does he? Have you done something for him that requires him to pay you back for it? He will not be indebted to anyone. Everything he gives us is by grace and by mercy, including to the lost people, causing his own sun to rise and set upon them every day, bringing his rain upon the just and the unjust, being providential and good to all the people of this earth, giving them parents, giving them life, giving them breath, giving them food, providing shelter and clothing, variously to different people. But if you live very long, you've had all those at his hand. Maybe through an intermediary, but they all come from God. And that's what he's saying. And the God whose hand your breath is and whose are all thy ways, everything you do, he says, you've not glorified him. And there's a world of people just like Belshazzar that don't glorify the Lord. Verse 24. Then, Daniel still speaking, then was the part of the hand sent from him. Now, it's a mysterious thing that talks about it. It says, in the original Hebrew, it's kind of like a joint of the hand. It means a finger. It said right, it is fingers. I always, in my mind, thought of it as a hand with fingers writing on the wall, but it's just the fingers. That's even creepier in my mind. If you just see fingers with no hand to guide them, grasping something that can cut into plaster to write words. And we read later on, the words were big, they were bold, they're not like tiny script. The whole room could see this happening. Just fingers engraving plaster in big letters, one letter at a time. I mean, how strange. He says, the part of the hand sent from him, and this writing was written. Now we say sent, it does make you think an angel. But he didn't say he sent an angel. He said a part of a hand. Now, does God have hands? Well, he speaks about his hands often. with an outstretched hand and a powerful hand or an outstretched arm, talks about the thing. He gives himself attributes of humanity, even in the Old Testament. But in the New Testament, he actually adds manhood to his divinity. He actually puts upon himself our nature. He does indeed have hands and feet. There's nail holes in all four of them, right? And we will see that one day, as will the lost. He says, all flesh shall see me together. So he said, this is what was written. Mene, tekel, upharsin. It is Chaldean, but some of the words are also the same word or a very close approximation in the Hebrew. So, he tells both what the words are and what they mean to Belshazzar at the same time. So he says, this is the interpretation of the thing. Mene, God hath numbered thy kingdom and finished it. Now the word mene means numbered and finished. So he's saying, you have been numbered and finished. Or maybe better, Babylon, which he was ruler over, have been numbered and finished. You know, Babylon was raised up for one reason. It didn't last long. It was glorious, but God's national people, Israel of the flesh, had so sinned against him they needed to be punished. He wasn't going to just wipe them out because Christ was going to come through that line of people. He owed it to the world to fulfill a promise whereby a Savior would come to this world and bring life to the dead. So he kept them, but he had to punish them. He punished them a prescribed amount. 1 year in captivity for every year that they had not let the land lie fallow and have a Sabbath, which was 1 in every 7 years. So it wound up being 70 years they were in captivity. Babylon was raised up not too long before they went into captivity, and it was shut down. When it was shut down, they were released within a very short time. Daniel was there for the whole duration of that, not from the beginning of Babylon, but from the time they took Jerusalem captive until Cyrus did away with them, with the rule, and eventually sent them home. I mean, in pretty short order. So anyway, numbered and finished. So he says, this is the interpretation. Meaning, God hath numbered thy kingdom and finished it. Babylon is over. Now we read of Mystery Babylon, something probably yet future. It could be talking about Rome. It could be talking about Rome and something in the future. But it was certainly future at the time of the writing of the Bible. And it also falls, just like overnight. It just suddenly falls. And everybody on earth is talking about it. It says, Babylon the Great is fallen. Fallen. They're just shocked. All the merchants lament, complain, woe is me. All the ship owners. Bible, Revelation talks about it. They're all devastated because they made their living off of Babylon the Great. It's not talking about this Babylon, it's talking about something else. We shall see what that is. Maybe not in Daniel, but whatever it is, it will also have a terminus. And that terminus, most likely, if it's at the end of the world, of course, will be when Christ comes back. Or maybe shortly there before that. So I need to finish reading it. So, God's numbered your kingdom, He's finished it. Tekel. Thou art weighed in the balances and found wanting. Tekel just means weighed. You've been weighed and you're too light. And that's the thing. He's too light. He's a lightweight. He's not like Nebuchadnezzar. God gave Nebuchadnezzar space to repent. And Nebuchadnezzar repented. Nebuchadnezzar was a great king. Ruthless. Particularly as a lost man. no compassion shown, but he was good at what he did, and he established a wonderful kingdom, but it went to his physical descendants, and they were not worthy of it. And then instead of saying Upharsin, Daniel says Perez. Perez. Now, Upharsin in the Chaldean means divisions, like the plural, divisions. Peres means divided into two. Okay? So divisions come at this point. The head of gold introduced divisions. It was the one solitary kingdom in that image that Nebuchadnezzar saw that was a singularity, one head. The chest and arms of silver was divided between the Medes and the Persians. The belly of brass would have been Alexander, but he died young, and it was split up between his four top generals, and so the Ptolemies and all that, it was divided four ways. And then even the Roman Empire had two major divisions, east and west, and the demise of it led towards 10 kingdoms represented by the 10 toes. So there's divisions coming for the empires of the world. They won't be singular unities like they once were under Great Babylon, under Nebuchadnezzar. So Upharsin is correct, it's divisions. But as it relates to Belshazzar, he says Peres, which means divided into two. Thy kingdom is divided and given to Medes and Persians. And that's exactly who took it. Cyrus was a Persian. His mother was Median. He ruled over the whole thing. But Darius, a Mede, was given the immediate rule of Babylon. Then verse 29. Then commanded Belshazzar, and they clothed Daniel with scarlet. He lived up to what he said he would do. He put a gold chain about his neck. He made a proclamation concerning him that he should be the third ruler in the kingdom. In the night was Belshazzar, king of the Chaldeans, slain. And Darius the Median took the kingdom, being about 62 years old. See how different it is? If a person has, like I'm sure Nebuchadnezzar did, thoughts towards God, a desire to know something, God works with that. And he draws them. Even though it may be a rough road of being drawn, your pride resisting him so much that it's hard for him to work with you, but he will draw you to himself if you want to be drawn. Whosoever will, let him come and drink of the water of life freely, is what it says. Some of us are just slow to drink. A passage came to mind when I looked at that, and I'll end this horrible sermon. Let me get to it, though. It's in Revelation, the very last book. So, whereas with Nebuchadnezzar, there was a hope, a reasonable hope. And of course, divine knowledge by God that repentance was something that could be worked in him. Nebuchadnezzar, a much younger man, only a ruler for a very short time, was full of himself and full of wine and full of riotous living. And he really had no thought. He was happy till his countenance changed, till he saw those fingers writing on the wall. But here's what it says about it in Revelation chapter 22. This is after, so when Cyrus comes, who God calls his anointed, he destroyed Babylon, and the very night that happened, this man was put to death. Jesus is coming just as quickly, just as suddenly, and just as finally. He says that he's going to return. There's no question about it. If I go, I'll come again. That's what he says. Well, he's gone. So he's coming again. But here in 22, it talks about heaven for a while. And then in verse 8, and it says, "And I, John, saw these things and heard them, and when I heard and seen, I fell down to worship before the feet of the angel, which showed me these things. Then saith he unto me, See thou doest it not. For I am thy fellow servant, and of thy brethren the prophets, and of them which keep the sayings of this book. Worship God. And he said unto me, Seal not the sayings of the prophecy of this book, for the time is at hand." Verse 11, "He that is unjust, let him be unjust still. He that is filthy, let him be filthy still. He that is righteous, let him be righteous still. He that is holy, let him be holy still. And behold, I come quickly, my reward is with me, to give every man according as his work shall be. I am the Alpha and the Omega, the beginning and the end, the first and the last." When Jesus comes back, it's too late to change a thing. Now there's doctrines out there that think he comes back and has secret resurrections of all different types. He says, speaking of every resurrection, he said, "I'll raise it up at the last day." The last day. There can only be one last day. If it's not the last day, then it's not the last day. If it is the last day, it's the last day. I'll raise it up the last day. He says it over and over and over again. We're going to be raised up at the last day. Even Martha, Lazarus' sister, knew that. He says, I know that he'll rise, speaking of Lazarus, before Christ rose him, at the resurrection on the last day. Jews of that time knew that there would be a resurrection at the last of all days. Well, when he comes back, if you're filthy, you stay filthy. If you're defiled, you're defiled. If you're holy, you're holy. There's no changing after that. He warned people, particularly the Pharisees of his day, when Jesus walked the earth. He said, "You'll seek me." He's prophesying to them. There'll come a time when you're going to seek me. He doesn't say it that way, but he says, you will seek me, and you won't find me. And you'll die in your sins. I mean, see, he's already determined. It's not like he's saying, I'm going to make sure that I don't save you. He's not saying that. He's saying, you'll seek, but you won't find. They're not seeking in the right place. We read about it in the New Testament. It says, Paul speaking of those very same people, he says they go about trying to establish their own righteousness, and they don't seek the righteousness that cometh from God only. They're seeking the wrong thing. Well, we don't want to make that mistake. We want to seek the Lord, in whose hand our very breath and existence is, and be satisfied and content with whatever he graciously gives us until he comes back and we get it all. He said, everything's yours, is what he says in the Bible. It's all yours. There'll come a point where we'll hold nothing back from us. Whatever there is, it's ours. We're children in the household of God. We inherit. We are inheritors, heirs of God, it says. Meaning we inherit God. I don't think it means heirs of God's riches. It doesn't have that word. It's heirs of God. In that new world, God will so fully infest our heart, if that's probably a bad word, but dwell in it, to where we'll have the fullness of God everywhere we go. We will have God constantly. It's a good thing. Anyway, getting off track. I'll end it there, such as it was.